Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of American Grit with myself, Tim Jensen. We are continuing the conversation of mental health and alternative access to treatments. And today, I think we have a very awesome guest for you who's doing some incredible work here in the state of Texas that will lead to potentially national opportunities of access for these alternatives in the realms of psilocybin, and as well as ibogaine, which is a very hot topic here in the state of Texas. I would like to introduce Dr. Lynnette Averill, who is with us as an associate professor from the Baylor College of Medicine, as well as the director of research of the Menninger Clinic, as well as the co-founder and chief science officer of Reason for Hope, an organization that we are greatly invested in as the Veterans Mental Health and Leadership Coalition. So, Dr. Lynnette Averill, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Really honored to be here. Really honored to chat about what I think are incredibly important medicines and incredibly important work, and really happy to just get more out there, I suppose, about these emerging therapies and how we can all hopefully work together to save some lives.
Absolutely. And the emergent therapies, I think, is the right way of framing this, right? As we hear a lot of conversation about evidence-based therapies that are happening right now that are surrounding psychotropics, which we are largely learning have no real effects on individuals and been misdiagnosing for well over 60 years. Personal opinion. But I think, having these conversations now about emergent therapies and the value that they're bringing in the sense of holistic access to these things that are not based on poisons and, that have been really tested throughout human existence. Of having real impact in mental health. You and I met several years ago when we started this conversation of psilocybin within the state of Texas on the back of the passage of 1802. You and I and a few others, Brian Roberts and a couple other influential individuals, were walking the halls and having Dr. Planco, right, having some great conversation with the legislators, and I think that has led to where we are today in a lot of respects. Logan Davidson, Brian Hubbard, individuals that have been on the show previously, are now leading the effort of conversation in this state, leveraging the power of 1802 and the successes of that, as well as a lot of the work that you have been doing in the background and a lot of the work that the colleges in the state of Texas have been endorsing. I think we are at this point in time that there's new opportunities. There is a bright horizon, and there's hope. There's hope again.
Yeah. I think, I hope, I hope so too. I suppose I will take the opportunity because to say that I very clearly am not speaking as a representative of a Baylor or the Menninger Clinic. I think very much so Reason for Hope probably and the Veterans Coalition. I think, the things that you comment on are I suppose so also in line with my lovely shirt that you guys have given me, zero fucks given. I think we are long past the point of saying within mental health care that the status quo is acceptable or that the status quo is working, that we have interventions. We have, for PTSD, we have a whopping 2 FDA-approved medications, and really a handful of quote-unquote gold standard talk therapies. But the reality of these is the talk therapies are really hard and have a dropout rate of as much as 55%.
Right.
And even the people who complete those often don't feel remarkably better. Similarly with the medications, whether those are 2 of the only 2 actually specifically for PTSD, though when I say specifically for PTSD, they were both developed as antidepressants, so right. They're sort of ish specifically for PTSD. The reality of those is that it is weeks to months before you might actually feel better. And that's only about a third of people who do feel better. And during that time, you're going to lose or gain 20 or 30 pounds, have cognitive impairment, sexual impairment, feel totally emotionally numb. And if you don't feel better at that 2 to 3 month mark, don't worry, you can go back to the psychiatrist and start over at zero.
Right.
Like there's no benefit. Actually, there's a reduced benefit the more times you try that.
Yeah.
And there's, I think that has been the reality for PTSD, especially for PTSD and suicidality, that there has really been nothing new for 20 years. For the entire period of the global war on terror, it's been status quo.
Yeah.
And I think, that within our veteran community, the numbers say that we're losing between ultimately 20 to 40 or more. What we know about all of these statistics around suicidality and overdose and things is that those are always low. Those are always low ball numbers. 20 to 40 people a day, only within the veteran community. And that none of this exists in a vacuum. And that we, I think, are, in my opinion, we are very much in a mental health crisis, unlike anything we've really dealt with before. That we have these wild effects among the veteran community, the 20 years of combat and war. Then we also have all of these other things, whether that is exacerbated from COVID or the sort of political, social upheaval or any of these other things, that we have increasing rates despite literally trillions of dollars being spent in mental health care in this country a year. We have elevating rates of PTSD, depression, anxiety, addiction across the scheme of things that people can be addicted to, suicide, and that there's still this sense among so many people of, we're doing such good work.
Yeah.
And for me, I think, the reality is that I think I will say, that SSRIs and talk therapy are critical.
Sure.
They do work for some people. I don't want to minimize them. They are critical interventions. Delighted that we have them. And they just are not enough. And I also say, in my opinion, I think many, many people, even when they do have a response, that it kind of gets to that point of tolerating existence. Like, I'm not actively right here in this moment trying to figure out how to end my life or if I can just sort of disappear into the woodwork. But it often doesn't get beyond that to people actually feeling like they have a life that they want to be living or are content with in some way. And so for me, I think the whole path to psychedelics and exploring these, these more rapid acting and robustly acting medicines is such a critical thing for a myriad of reasons. One being that they actually are rapid acting. So we know very quickly if someone is going to respond or not, rather than the months, years, decades sometimes that people struggle along finding something that may or may not ever work. But also it seems that people who have even a somewhat mediocre response feel like they have more of a foundation to go forward and continue that work to build a life they actually want to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
That there's more sense of meaning and purpose and connection to self, to others, to the world, nature, the divine in whatever shape or form, all of these sorts of things.
Yeah. Anecdotally, every experience that I've seen people come from out of, be it just all psychedelic experiences, one thing has been abundantly clear, that their belief in something of a spiritual power exists. And it may not have existed before that experience, but coming out of it, there's a whole new understanding of how it all works, right?
Yeah.
And the spirituality of it. And I think that, when we, look at a lot of the vacuum that's within the, society, from a socioeconomic standpoint, or just even a humanities standpoint, is, the loss of spirituality is driving a lot of the addiction behaviors that we have within the population, that is, exacerbating these traumatic experiences that are often happening at early ages, that are suppressed through middle adulthood, and start coming out when greater stress is being applied to those individuals, be it through hardships or other trauma, right? Because, from the military standpoint, the majority of these individuals, the combat is such a small aspect and is not the trauma, right? It is, bringing, out some trauma that might have happened in their, earlier existence, right? In their childhood years, and you see that a lot in people that have non-combat experiences when they're coming out, from an insulated environment that the military does provide in many aspects, from, free housing to not having to worry about your food if you're enlisted because you got 3 squares a day. And once that blanket of security is ripped off from you and you're having to find your own way in the civilian world and those things don't exist any longer, that brings a significant level of stress in a transition period that drives behavior in a whole other direction, right? Because it's surfacing a lot of those things that the person may have experienced in younger years. And I see that over and over and over again. So when we think about the population at large and using the veteran as a subset of that, I think we've got some big problems within our culture, right? Absolutely. And by getting back to the basics and the spirituality and and addressing ourselves in a different way through our mental health, rather than the first thing is like, oh, let's put you on these poisons and pat you on the back and say, hey, get back out there, kid, you're going to do a great job, it's going to be fine, here's some benzos, you're going to be feeling great by the end of the week. Those are short term circumstances or solutions to deeper problems. And, that brings me to some of the strategies that are being deployed within the veterans community right now is, the dependency of psychotropics that, is often the first thing that's being dumped into the veterans' hands immediately coming into that system. When we learn that 68% of the population in the Veteran Health Administration that is receiving care is on a psychotropic, plus an additional 28% on an antidepressant,
right?
We have to start questioning the strategy, right? And then we have to start looking for alternative measures that are less poisonous and have greater efficacy. Right.
Yeah. No, I will say I have an appointment at the VA, and right now I had one grant wrap up and I'm waiting for a second to see if it gets funded with, of course, who knows what that might look like with the research landscape right now. But I am taking on some clinical work in the meantime, right? One of the patients I was just assigned, one of the veterans, is on 44 medications right now. 44 active meds, chronic depression, anxiety, PTSD, sleep trouble, all these things. And I was just like, wow, okay, 44. But then I suppose going back to the crisis and what the fuck are we doing? How do we have people on 5, 10, 20, 40 medications and look at the numbers to see how many people are struggling, but that 20 to 40 people a day are actually dying, which is a low ball number, and that's just tip of the iceberg. The people who die are tip of the iceberg in terms of who's struggling, who's thinking about it, who maybe tried, who attempted it and is still here. Those aren't calculated in that number. So how does anyone sit back and say, I think we're good to go here, when we have people taking 5, 10, 15, 20 medications to offset the side effects of the medications that were caused by the other medications, and nobody's getting better?
Yeah. That statement alone, Lynette, leads to so many questions of people inside the system that I would ask of is nobody paying attention to this? Right. Is everybody just saying, okay, we accept the strategy from higher that, we've got that, we now have access to trazodone and we're going to dump this massive amount of drugs into the system because we got a contract with the provider. But damn the idea that 67% higher suicidal ideology with this medicine, in comparison to Ambien. We don't have that contract.
Right. Well, I think
it's crazy to me.
Sometimes I really have to work on my poker face and my rage and not just want to shake people. So I think too that argument, I think in the beginning intro you mentioned the evidence-based medicine, and there's all of this, this hype and this excitement that the VA, and it's not just the VA, the VA is not, in many ways, is not unlike any other healthcare system in the country, that there are these evidence-based things. We have these SSRIs, we have these talk therapies, and then there's this pushback, this wild pushback, especially on, all of these psychedelics and emerging therapies of, well, what's the evidence for them? How do we know they work? There's not appropriate blinding. There's not this. The trials are too small. How do we know? What are we going to do? Just shove more drugs at veterans?
Right.
Like, I don't understand the mentality of, but the evidence base, the evidence of what? That so few people are actually getting better. So many people continue to struggle, feel worse, and or die by suicide, by overdose, by any other, means of very early mortality. That all of those people have not only, again, not existing in a vacuum, that huge ripple effect to family, friends, community, that like intergenerational effect. Certainly as the daughter of a veteran who died by suicide, I am very aware of what that effect looks like.
Yeah.
And how do we say, but the evidence, and then say, nope, the psychedelics, that's crap, we can't look at it.
Well,
when people are saying, but no, none of that did anything for me and made me worse. That actually put me to where I was going to kill myself.
Yeah.
And then I left, especially for veterans, I left the country that I served, that I sacrificed for, left that country to go to another country to get the only thing that seemed to save my life.
Yeah.
That is a plant or animal-based intervention.
Yeah. It's absurd.
But that people say, oh, you just want more drugs. Oh, it's not evidence-based. Like, what?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, I think there's a great example to even land it further in some of the things we talk about on this program is like evidence-based. Okay, awesome. Like evidence-based. Like, what are some things inside the VA right now that have a great deal of evidence, but is not, outside of plant-based therapies that is just the veterans are not getting access to, that has, a great amount of evidence on neuroplasticity, a great amount of evidence about psychoplastogens, right, and brain rejuvenation, and that's hyperbaric chambers. But the Veteran Administration keeps that at a 10-foot pole. I'm like, no, that's heresy.
Right.
We don't want that. But again, like, who's driving that conversation? Is it the providers that are driving all those psychotropics into the system that that want to keep these evidence-based, non-medicine based therapeutics, to the corner while we dump more trazodone, Wellbutrin into this system and are harming people?
Yeah.
Because here's what I don't read every year in the National Suicide Report from the VHA is how many people inside the system are at length. How long are they on these SSRIs and psychotropics, and what is the dosing size on average? We don't see any of that, right? Because they're afraid, because they're collecting it. We know they're collecting that, but they're afraid to show that because they're abusing the length of these things because people should not be on SSRIs for more than 6 months.
Yeah. And most people, veteran and non-veteran, often end up taking that for the rest of their life.
Yes. And then we're wondering why, and then we, extrapolate that even further. And I'm going to, my opinion, I'm gonna tread into the water here, so you don't have to agree with me. But we extrapolate that over into the civilian side of the equation here, and we're looking at the suicides, and we're looking at how we're exposing children to these SSRIs. I was exposed to Paxil at 11 years old. Yep. Right. And, then we wonder why there's all these school shootings, and we're wondering why there's all these just weird mental health occurrences that are happening across the younger generation of Americans today. But we don't want to look what's staring us in the face.
Right.
We're going to say, well, guys, all the evidence shows that this is working. Well, what about all this evidence over here of the death?
What about the evidence of the dead kids in schools and the dead veterans and the dead everybody and the struggling everybody? Yeah, no, I don't know. I think that I say that I sometimes am very jaded, but also I have a quote that I start pretty much every talk that I give with. It's not my quote, but says reality is the leading cause of stress amongst those in touch with it. That I think, I mean, it's a shit show out there.
Yeah.
It's a shit show from every angle. And I think even the most privileged among us, that there's no escaping stress or trauma from some angle at this point. And I think, as a society, there's so much that needs to be dealt with. And that's certainly something that I spend a bit of time thinking, especially doing all of this advocacy work around psychedelics and emerging therapies and suicide prevention and all of this, that a challenge I see is that even if we get, all of these that I absolutely think are very much the new, in many cases, very ancient, the new frontier of mental health care, of psychiatry, if these are the best interventions ever, like the best on the planet, they're only going to get us so far if we don't fix some of these other things.
It's the then what statement, right?
As a society, like you can come to the clinic and you can have a transformative experience, but then if we send you home to either, not having a home or having housing insecurity, food insecurity, being in a domestic violence or abusive relationship, not having trouble at work,
we just rub dirt on it.
Right. Whatever the stuff is, whatever stuff people have going on, everybody has stuff, some much more than others. We're just kind of giving you a Band-Aid and sending you home. And then again, I think I don't at all want to bash on the VA. I think there, many, many people in the VA I think are incredible. It's a shit system. It's a shit system. And in many ways, I think they have an uphill battle in terms of the bureaucracy. And, with psychedelics especially, it's a big ask. It's a big ask for any healthcare system to shift in this thing that, at least the way the FDA is having it now, right, does take, if you and I are two providers, you could see, depending on your credentials, like 8 to 30 people a day.
Right.
So could I. And they say, we want the two of you to go and see one person today. That is, I get it. It's a big ask. How do we maintain other patient care while doing that? And again, okay, so yeah, we did only see one person today, but they're actually okay now.
Yeah.
And we don't need to see them every week for the next 40 years of their life.
Right.
But yeah, I think, the sort of deeper root causes and what are we doing about that? And yeah, I think the Band-Aid issue is rampant, that whether that's mental health care or so many other things, like, let's just Band-Aid it and call it good. And
yeah, we find ourselves in this weird situation, like, in the VA's, they're very proud of this. Like, I'm picking on this. Right? So like the VA in the National Suicide Report, they're very proud that 73% of veterans are now using guns or locks on their guns or something to that effect. Like, okay, fantastic. That's great harm reduction.
Sure.
Great harm reduction. And to many circumstances and degrees, like what we're talking about with psychedelics is harm reduction.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I feel like in a lot of these conversations, we are still not getting to the root. And I think that's what we are talking about right now is this societal factor and the fabric of how do we treat ourselves within our country and our countrymen.
Yeah.
How are we bettering this fabric? Because if the fabric does not improve, then all of this is for nothing. We're just keeping you in the fight, but you're going to come back because the fight is going to kick your ass again. Right. And until we start really focusing on the root of how are we going to make an impact on the fabric of our country, which is going to reduce the divorce rates that are destroying families, which is adding to the mental stress of the young children that are leading people to addictions and ultimately suicide. It doesn't take a person with any sense of IQ to observe that. The lowest denominator can figure that out. Right. So, I love that we are having these conversations, and I want to get into some of the legislative actions that you're currently involved in. But, you know, but I think it's important that we have that conversation as part of this as well. It's just like, hey, like we have to do a better job at the fabric of the circumstance here. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about that, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think, you know, you've brought a couple of things, sort of that idea of spirituality, that idea of sort of the fabric of society. And one of the things that I think, you know, that I have had so much experience with in working with veterans clinically and research, you know, just so many friends and family who are veterans, is that idea of moral injury, right? That that so much of morals and values, whether that relates to religion with a capital R or spirituality or just that this is who I like to see myself as, these are the things that are important to me. Stress and trauma also often get in there and sort of throw a wrench in that. Force us to do things sometimes that really don't align with whatever those things are. And then what do we do with that? How do we move forward with that? And I think, you know, I do agree that for many people, spirituality in whatever shape or form that is a critical piece and a critical piece of the healing that takes place with psychedelics. I think, though, I would almost say that it's... I certainly do know a couple of people immediately who come to mind who I would say did not at all have a sort of spiritual experience in the sense of, you know, divine in some way existing or not, but more of almost a self-divinity, if you will, that realizing or maybe re-accepting or sometimes accepting for the first time that they, in fact, have value as they are, and that they are important to the world, and that they are part of the world and the universe and have meaning, even if in their eyes they are, you know, but a ball of energy and sort of meat and bones.
Yeah.
That maybe the God with the capital G doesn't have meaning for them. But I think that piece is such a critical piece that stress and trauma and I think especially military related because of the nature of what that looks like sometimes. But that stripping away of that, so much of that identity and so much of that sense of value and belonging and sort of personhood, or at least I'll say quote unquote good personhood.
The righteous.
To get back some of that, I think, is where a lot of that being able to kind of mend those holes in the fabric, either of ourselves individually or of the larger community and society.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, you know, this is largely, you know, a reason why I like talking about it in, you know, the work that we do, not personally, but in the, you know, the macro of it all is like, you know, argue with it or not, but this is a national security issue in the greatest scheme of things. Like the national mental health of our country is not good. Right. And that leads to, you know, a lot of problems that, you know, could be of detriment to our national security. So it is important that we have these conversations. And now that brings us into a great segue of like what legislatively is happening around some of these things. You know, here specifically in the state of Texas, you know, there's been a lot of advancement. You know, there's been you know, some legislative work that has happened, you know, previously that has opened the doors for a lot of the conversations that are happening today. And you find yourself on the leading edge of that, working with a lot of great organizations and again, people that have been on this program. You know, can you share, you know, kind of what is the developments in the recent conversations of psychedelics in the state of Texas?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think Texas is a great spot to be for psychedelics. So when I was recruited to Baylor in 2020, recruited to Baylor in the VA, I was recruited really to be, you know, setting up a research program in these emerging therapies, And not long after I moved, I sort of serendipitously saw a post on LinkedIn from Alex Dominguez, who was a then Democratic state representative, who, said something like, our mental health care for veterans is just insufficient. We need something more or something better, and psychedelics maybe that thing. And I thought, well, yeah, yes, I completely agree. So reached out, and just sort of sent an email and said, totally agree. Love this. Also new to the state. Curious who you're working with. And I don't know exactly how long. It seemed like I had barely clicked send on that email. And Logan Davidson called, was like, hi, who are you? Who are you working with? Cause we would be very interested. So I would say, sort of the match was made there, and I had the opportunity to get involved in the legislative process for 1802 and serve as the subject matter expert in terms of what is the reality of treatment for veterans at this point? What is the reality of treatment for PTSD, TBI, suicidality, all of these things more broadly? What are these emerging therapies? What would be an appropriate next step? And, had the opportunity to work with a really incredible team, many folks who Amber and Marcus Capone, Andrew Marr, Adam Marr, Morgan Luttrell, all these folks, came and testified and said straight up, like, I did all the stuff. I did everything that there was to do, and this was the Hail Mary pass for me. Mm-hmm. And I also testified in terms of the outcome that my dad had was not the life-saving, that I know what happens with undertreated or untreated mental health concerns. And that there is potential here. There's incredible potential. And, how can we not go forward and be studying these and trying to get these into the hands of folks who really need them? And I think when that bill started, I think we all expected, like, we'll sort of inch it along and somewhere down the road. And I think certainly I was very pleasantly surprised. I think everyone was, that it passed both the House and Senate with almost unanimous support.
Yeah.
The day of the House testimony, I would encourage people to go watch that. Honestly, the testimony from the various veterans and the veteran spouse and things that day were incredible to the point that, like, literally people were coming in just to listen, and people were tearful, and, like, it was very moving. And I think a piece of that is that, yes, you have that draw of the veteran community. And again, I think a piece of that is that I don't think anybody's totally unscathed at this point.
Yeah.
So whether they know or are a veteran themselves and relate in that way, they still know or are someone who is
see a family member.
Yeah. Know somebody who's struggling or has died. And so that passed, and actually had the incredible opportunity of having, that I had said, I'm participating not because I, want to, I guess I'll say not participating only so that I could do the research, but I hopefully will apply for it. And after the press conference, they called to say, actually, we have to write in an institution for this bill. So would you want to? So, that's, and now here we are several years later. We have just started dosing, but House Bill 1802, I will say, is the first legislation and is really landmark legislation for a number of reasons. Most importantly, it is that Texas is the first state in the nation that really, I say, put their money where their mouth was, that they said, I understand that there's a problem, and let me cut you a check to evaluate this potential solution. But also really we're the first state to put funding towards psychedelic anything, research, training of providers, building infrastructure, any of these things. And what the bill does is funds a review of the literature on psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine. So ketamine is sort of this interesting thing in there, since it's not technically a psychedelic, but is sort of umbrellaed in there for some people. And then MDMA and psilocybin, of course, being the two drugs at that time which had the FDA breakthrough therapy designation and were farther along than anything else in the pipeline. They still are the two that are farthest along, though LSD also now has a breakthrough therapy designation, not for PTSD, but for anxiety disorder. And the other piece of the legislation is to lead a clinical trial of psilocybin for veterans with PTSD. And the reason that we landed on that specifically is because there already was a fair bit of literature suggesting that MDMA has some efficacy for PTSD. Certainly more work could be done, but there already was some literature there. Ketamine similarly already had a lot of literature suggesting that, at least for depression, there's a lot of literature, already had the FDA approval for S-ketamine for depression. Off-label it's being used. So psilocybin really was kind of this untapped. There's a lot of literature that says in depression, end-of-life anxiety, all of these things. So makes sense that it would have, significant effects. And certainly anecdotally, many veterans and many, many other people say it was incredible for PTSD specifically. So that passed in June of 2021 and then was delayed in terms of contracting and other things because Governor Abbott called a couple of special legislative sessions and, things were delayed. But I think the bill also sort of highlights a significant challenge, or not the bill, but the process and why people may be saying, if that passed in 2021, why are you just now dosing? And that is, I will say, if I did not have the deadline of the legislation, I would actually feel pretty proud of myself for how quickly I relocated across the country, set up a research program from zero, got an IRB, the FDA approval, the DEA approval, all these things, and was able to dose. Because it takes an obscenely long time to do all of those things. Of course, the challenge that gives me many of the gray hairs that I have is the deadline of the legislation, that this isn't, you have all the time in the world. So though, just started dosing psilocybin for veterans with PTSD. This is a collaboration with USONA Institute, which is one of the companies that has the breakthrough therapy designation for depression. And we are doing 2 doses. The first as a 15 milligram, like slightly lower dose than the standard. We're sort of calling that the introductory dose, if you will, so that especially people who are very, substance naive, psychedelic naive can have a bit of an introduction. Or, I think chatting before you said sort of that handshake, like let's get to know each other a bit. And then the second dose is 25 milligrams, which is much a heavier dose. And we've only dosed 3 people so far, but I will say I'm not surprised by the results, but the results have been overwhelmingly positive, remarkable, completely unheard of with SSRIs and talk therapy. And
amazing.
That both of the people that I will comment on are, like these folks that we've talked about that have done everything, been on 20 different medications, been to 10 different therapists. They've done the yoga, they've done all the stuff, and still hate themselves, hate their life. Everybody, there's nothing that they say is positive. We could maybe argue and say, well, but what about this? But they don't see that. Everything is crap. And there's no hope. There's no way of fixing it. Yeah. They are approaching this as a Hail Mary pass also. Like I've done everything else and I'm going to try it out. Why not? If this is the end, then I might as well go out with a bang, right? And 5 to 6 hours post-dose, post-low dose, they're already saying like, holy shit, the person that walked in here today is not the person walking out.
Yeah.
And that experience, we'll probably talk a bit more later, but that experience of the neuroplasticity, that experience of being able to sort of go in and evaluate things with a different perspective, to gain a different perspective, gain new insights about things, is so critical to seeing those things that have kept you stuck or kept you believing things about yourself or other people or the world or whatever that maybe are entirely inaccurate or maybe just are not serving anything other than self-harm at this point, and you can let those go through newfound empathy, compassion, forgiveness, whatever that may be. But yeah, 5 to 6 hours to see, these 3 veterans, all of whom had very severe, very chronic PTSD, and all of them, day one, had just this robust experience where they felt entirely different.
Yeah.
And at least 2 of them said, like, I don't recall feeling this good before, or I don't recall ever having that sense of contentedness or
the extra bounce in that step.
Yeah. And that, we have the 24-hour follow-up visit and then the first integration session where we kind of go through more what was the experience, what things came up, all that. And it's even bigger effects 24 hours later.
Yeah.
And then sometimes bigger and sustained effects the week out. Then we just did dose 2 yesterday for one of the people. And again, he was like, my first dose was like a breadcrumb compared to the sun relative to this second dose. And I mean, what I don't understand again is, but the evidence base. No one is saying that starting Prozac was the most meaningful experience of their life.
Right.
No one is saying that the 5 different therapists or this citalopram or whatever made them feel 5 to 6 hours later like they could actually go home and not want to die that night. Like that, how as healthcare providers or anyone do we continue to push back on that? Like, I totally get it. Yeah, I'm all about the research. I am a scientist. Sure, we want the research. We want the safety. But how do we... but the evidence base... I just don't understand.
It's hard to reconcile, right?
Yeah.
It's like, we're taking, in some of these circumstances, especially in the psilocybin research studies, you're taking, you're essentially getting, hundreds of hours of therapy condensed into 6 hours worth of, medicine treatment.
Yeah.
Boom. And these people are having profound effects on relatively small doses.
Yeah.
We're not talking like hero dose 6 grams.
No, these are not wildly high doses. No.
Right. We're talking like these are micro doses that, generally I personally take on a daily basis, right? Like a micro dose of psilocybin will put that little bounce in your step every day. Why? Because it's plant-based medicine. It's the spirits in you. It's reducing the inflammation. It's giving you all these different medicinal values to your body that is just putting you in a state of harmonious balance.
Yeah.
It's incredible. But and to your point, like the evidence-based conversations is, fighting against it for whatever conspiratorial reasons there are.
Yeah, and I think there are a myriad of reasons why there is that pushback. I think there is the pushback. Certainly, for some people, just the general sort of stigma or misunderstanding of the whole Schedule I drugs and the Controlled Substances Act and the counterculture hippies, all of that garbage. Conversation for another day. I think the Controlled Substances Act was entirely a political move and had zero to do with actual safety of these interventions. Were some people misusing them? Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is the reality of the human existence. But people misuse everything.
The more I read the CIA vault in those documents, it sounds like it was ripped out of the market because the CIA was using those things for other reasons. Call me crazy.
No, I think absolutely. And I think that generally the war on drugs has had much more to do with keeping the poor, the black and brown citizens, all of these things down than it has at all to do, again, with either the safety of these drugs or that in some way that has been profoundly effective and, keeping drugs away from kids. Like, who's not all for keeping drugs away from kids? Yes, absolutely. But that's not what's happened with this.
Right.
So I think that's a piece of it. I think, I don't know. Again, jaded, and probably some of these things, I hear this little voice in my head that's like, you should probably just not say these things out loud. But
I hear that guy all the time.
Certainly, with the evidence-based treatments, like the talk therapies, for trauma, these are very manualized. These are very much, nice to see you. Please come in. We'll spend 4 minutes doing an introduction for today and then go to worksheet A. We'll spend 7 minutes on worksheet A. Oh, no. I don't have time to hear about whatever may have come up in the week. We need to move on to the next section. And I mean, for me, I have sort of always been a bit rogue in those because I don't feel like life happens that way. And certainly trauma and healing don't happen in these, 5-minute, perfectly linear things. But I think also that there is security in that for a lot of providers, that working with trauma it's hard. It's hard for you, the person with the trauma, and it's hard for me, the provider, sitting there holding that space sometimes. And I think many people find that security in, if you say something I don't know quite what to do with, or that I find distressing, I can just, okay, let's move on to the worksheet.
Yeah.
And that has some value. I think there is a bit of, dare I say, ego also, that none of these are things that someone with a fancy degree initially created in a fancy lab somewhere, that these are, at least many of these things we're talking about, psilocybin, ibogaine, et cetera, are plants or animals. And, in the case of things like that originally, again, were used by indigenous communities around the world. And I think there is a bit of push there of, how do I, with my degrees and credentials, bring that experience, that knowledge, that wisdom, and now we try to westernize it, and there's sort of that. I think there's that challenge there also.
To pull on that string a little bit more, right? I think the medical industry in total hides behind the idea of the scientific method. No, well, let me rephrase. Hides behind evidence-based therapies using the scientific method, right, as that control, because there's that's really the only hurdle in a lot of these things, right? And for a lot of these people that have been inside the medical system and have trained and administered these therapies for their entire career, to be now being told that, like, hey, did you know that those psychotropics that you've been administering have no value and you've been hurting people? Like, that's hard for people to reconcile, right? And I think that's one of the bigger reasons why when you get down out of the big pharma and you click down into like who's administrating and pushing these pills around. Well, the industry has been trained, the medical industry has been trained through their practicing and the education that these are positive aspects of medical treatment.
Right.
And they're not.
Right.
And now the evidence is showing that, and you have the industry that's like, well, we're going to push back on that because that's what we've been taught for the last 40 years.
Right.
40, 50 years.
Right. I think certainly you have the challenge of economics in a couple of ways. One, that these are, people say they're sort of resource intensive and so expensive, which they are, but it's sort of an upfront cost, but then not after that, relative to and I guess I'll say what I mean by that is, yes, it is intensive. You have to have generally 2 therapists. You've got to have this. You do the dosing. It's a whole day. It's a lot. But then in many cases, we're not going to see you again. Mm-hmm. Or maybe we do, but you're just kind of coming in for a little checkup. Or some people do go back and take an SSRI and find that it actually helps now because it doesn't have quite so much that it's trying to manage, whatever these things are. But also, we're not having you attempt suicide every couple months, or have to have inpatient hospitalization, or drinking or drugging yourself to death, or, lower rates of domestic violence and abuse, more time that people are actually working or going to school, less homelessness, all of these things. If we think that there may be something that could actually provide healing in some way, that the costs of that are, we can't calculate that really, versus, you yes, it's cheaper for me to see one patient every 45 minutes, but I'm going to see you forever, or I'm going to see you for 6 weeks now, and then you're going to drop out because hopefully you're feeling better, or maybe you're not, and you're like, this just fucking isn't working. Why am I going? But then things get so bad again a couple months later, then you, like, well, that piece is challenging. How do you get that upfront cost and get over that hurdle? I think the other piece, though, again, to my jaded and maybe don't say things out loud, that there's absolutely more money to be made in keeping people sick than there is in getting people well.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm the CEO of Endeavor, right, and, I'm looking at this opioid problem that largely, that company created back in the 1960s, I wouldn't want to solve that with plant-based medicine. I would want to create a product like Suboxone so I can continue to treat these people and have them on it for long periods of time, right? Because, I think Brian Hubbard clearly articulated it in some of the conversations he's had on big levels, is saying, the treatment, the current opioid abatement treatment right now costs well over $100,000, and it has a low efficacy rate.
Yeah.
Right. In comparison to the ibogaine, where it is, administered for often with follow-on treatments less than $20,000 one time.
Yep.
I mean, as a CEO, I would look at that incredibly as a threat. Like, ooh, we need to destroy that.
Yeah. I
Right?
don't like that one bit.
And at the end of the day, like going back to your point of reality, right? The reality of this world is that this world is driven by profit, and the lowest, having the lowest, the highest margins at the best rates, and that's what drives all of this. And until we break free of that, and I'm really encouraged, with the Robert Kennedy coming online in the HHS, that this can potentially drive a lot of this change of behavior of how we are looking at treating people, because we are a symptom-based medical society right now,
Right.
and it's based because of profits.
Yeah.
And people are dying at that. Cancer, suicide, all sorts of ailment. We talk a lot in the foundation. Like, there's over 775,000 veterans that have died in the VA's care because they're not getting access to hyperbaric treatment in relation to diabetic ulcers from amputations. Why? Why are we allowing? That's nearly 1 million veterans that have died because we're just not giving them access, because your evidence-based theory of bullshit over here is driving a particular behavior that is suppressing the evidence-based stuff that clearly shows that hyperbaric chamber is a better alternative.
Yeah. I think the other piece of that is, but what about the evidence base? But yet they're not doing research to fill in the evidence. Even if they were to find that the evidence does say, nope, this is crap.
Right. There's no intellectual curiosity.
They're not doing the research.
Right.
And, I think it's great that the VA has now funded a project. I will say, I think it's kind of late in the game.
It was like $1.5 million or something like that.
Yeah. I have not understood how the largest healthcare institution in the country, providing care specifically to a population that significantly struggles with stress and trauma-related mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, PTSD, suicidality, addiction, TBI, pain, moral injury, end of life, death sorts of concerns. How does that institution not see little dribbles initially and now lots of stuff saying, oh my God, holy shit, look at this stuff that seems to be totally remarkable with depression and PTSD and suicidality and addiction and pain and headache and TBI even. How do they not say, oh my God, we've we've got to get in on this. Like,
Well, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. This next statement is going to be controversial, but I think it leads into it. Is like, it is my belief, and I'm sure many other veterans would believe this as well, is that the VA and the government looks at the veteran as a financial liability due to the benefits that are incurred that have to be paid out annually. So the decisions that are largely being made by government is looking at it as a financial relationship, right? Now, I think they're looking at it through the wrong lens, right? In the lens would be, okay, cool. If that is the belief, then it would be in the best interest of the United States government to gain access to this modality so that we can reduce the benefits by putting people in a healthier state and sending them on their way.
absolutely.
Rather than watching them die and reducing the pool, which seems to be the path of least resistance for the organization right now, because there's no change. The hundreds of billions of dollars that are being spent on the Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention are not changing the outcome of veterans at all. And I don't care what anybody says. There is no evidence that supports it. They can show the adjusted age brackets of who's not committing suicide at a rate compared to last year. But even the VA lends in their report that to compare year-over-year analysis is not conducive to the study because it produces a lot of false negatives. So even their data is not to be trusted. Right. So, like, what are we doing at this point? Like, it seems like the veterans are just crawling through the darkness, feeling on the wall, and trying to find this glimmer of hope or this ray of hope in their own, medical outcomes. And I think, like, how many more wars do we have to figure out or go through before we figure this out? Because, I hear over and over and over again, like, oh, goddamn, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. I get discounts. I get a day where I get my meals discounted at Applebee's and Hooters, right? But who the fuck is taking care of the death that is happening within this community, for the patriotic few that raised their hand to go fight for this country, and then are being cast to the side like farm tools and saying, you're done. We've used you to your full extent. Okay. I understand that. And I think everybody that raises their hand understands that. But at least you've created these systems that are supposed to be there for us, but they're killing us in droves. Over 156,000 at the low end right now over the last 20 years.
Relative to less than 6,000 who actually died in combat.
Yes. It's absurd. It's absurd. Right? Like, I've lost more friends since I've been home to cancer and suicide than I have to the enemy that I went over, 12,000 miles away to kill.
And wouldn't you prefer, even, of course, some of those still would have been lost, wouldn't you prefer if there was like really clear effort being made and changes at least trying to happen rather than a free cheeseburger once a year?
I think again it goes
about the free cheeseburger and the chicken wings,
but it goes back to that statement I said earlier, and I've said it over and over and over on this program, is like we've done a really great job of societally saying thank you for your service to the members of the military because of what we did to the veterans of Vietnam.
Yeah.
Right? That 70,000 individuals had to be treated like shit. For the veterans of today to have any sense of respect.
Yeah, you can walk down the street and hopefully not get spit on now, which that's a great win.
Well, this time around, we just need to be worried about, do we have a roof over our head?
Correct.
Right. And is that person saying, thank you for my service, going to be giving me $1 because I'm asking them because I'm panhandling on the side of the road? And those are the extremes, right?
Sure.
But, I think it illustrates the point nonetheless.
Yeah.
Right. So I think as we think about like how awesome these medicines are to, you were talking about like beyond symptom-based, treatments, like, we talked a little bit about the neuroplasticity. We talked a little bit about the psychoplastogenic properties of these medicines, I understand what those are, and our listeners may not. Like, what does that mean when, like, if I'm being administered psilocybin, what is that actually doing to my brain?
So I think this is so incredibly cool, and really a lot of the reason why people have those, those really robust experiences is that, I think it's David Olson at UC Irvine coined this term psychoplastogen, but it's, a fancy name for this class of medicines that does include ketamine, psilocybin, ibogaine, that have a very rapid acting, like within hours, very rapid acting and robust effect on neuroplasticity. And what neuroplasticity is really is our brain's capacity to learn, to relearn, to adapt, to change. It's I would say sort of the foundation of the human existence is that plasticity. How is your brain wired? Because our brain is wired based off of every experience we have, everything we have ever seen, learned, everything, the brain responds to those things. So we're having, little bits of plastic growth right now in this conversation. Always that's happening. But with psilocybin and ibogaine especially, that is like so fast and so significant. Their research from animal models, Alex Kwan's group at Yale did this study, I think, and it's just amazing that they found that 24 hours after an ibogaine dose, there is at least 10% increase in spine density and strength. And 10% might sound like a low number. You're like, 10%, that's not a lot. If we think about the brain, though, is incredibly beautiful and intricate and so complex in many ways we don't begin to understand. There are billions of little things up there, these connections and wires and circuitry. 10% of a billion is a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And each of those really is an opportunity for adaptation, for change, for insight, for new perspective. And, I think that's why at that like 5, 6, 7 hour mark, people are already having such a significant experience because, people will talk about that time dilation of like, feels like I have literally just lived decades or several lifetimes here. And they feel like they have actually had that time of going back. And, one of the people that we have just dosed talked about this experience of going back and reliving some of his military experiences and seeing those from sort of fresh eyes, a different perspective.
Yeah.
Like the memory I have about that is actually not correct. And that was very liberating in some ways. But also, as you said, many of our military personnel, the service was not the first stress or trauma. So going back and also evaluating some of those things. And importantly, I think also going back and getting in touch with a lot of the good stuff that gets completely overshadowed with the stress and trauma. Whether that is that the military itself had a lot of good stuff, or that life before had a lot of good stuff, or that life after had a lot of good stuff. Often when we are in the throes of PTSD, addiction, depression, whatever, that all gets lost and everything is dark and bleak and miserable. There is no good in it. But, there's sort of several ways that I describe that experience with plasticity. One, if you think of all of the dendrites and spines really are, sort of this very complicated highway system or very densely packed forest. And you then kind of have this experience that maybe is like a well-lit path. You can kind of see a different way to go. One that I really like, though, is also sort of, if you think about a ski slope and if it's a ski slope that is kind of, you've skied down it and down it and down it, there's those pretty deep trenches that you're going down the exact path again. And if you get kind of to the edge, you might fall because the skis get up over that lip. But the psilocybin dose is like a fresh coat of new powder that you can take new paths, or maybe you decide some of those are the same paths that you want to take. You liked that path. You liked where that took you, what that did for you. And some of those you may say, oh, that actually did not take me where I thought it did. I don't want to do that anymore. Or, wow, every time I go down that path, I end up hurting myself. I don't want to do that anymore. Wow, that is actually not a path at all. That just goes, whatever that process is of reevaluating, kind of going through the filing cabinet of life. And that, I think, is such a critical piece for people to have that experience, because I think, those ideas and beliefs that often get ingrained in the context of stress and traumatic experiences are often inaccurate. For any number of reasons.
It's a mask, right?
Yeah.
It's a mask that the psyche puts on to survive.
Yes, absolutely. And to be able to take that off and evaluate those things, particularly when you are doing that in a safe and supported context, is an opportunity that, I think we said earlier that people do say this is like months or years of therapy in the day, that you don't usually have the opportunity to feel like you literally looked through every experience of your life and had 6 years of therapy all on a Tuesday, right?
Right.
But that experience for that rapid adaptation is just incredible. These also do have, the shifts on some of those other neurochemicals as well, on serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, all of these sorts of things. So you kind of have that kind of 1-2 punch, that very rapid effect on the neuroplasticity, that capacity to learn, relearn, build new perspectives, all of those things, and those shifts in neurochemicals, because those are important. Sure, if one of those is out of whack, then there can be any number of implications for that, mood and or otherwise. And I will say that SSRIs and things also do that. Again, kind of everything does that. So 2 to 3 months down the road, you can see in MRI scans that there is differences in plasticity.
Yeah.
But again, that's 2 to 3 months versus
Immediate
5 to 6 hours. And there's just no, to me, that either in terms of the acute life-saving benefit of, I could potentially have you feel better in 5 to 6 hours. Like, of course, this is not the golden bullet, the panacea. It's not going to be the case for every single person. But to know that you might feel better, or might feel a little better in 5 to 6 hours versus check back with me in the beginning of June, those are entirely different experiences.
Like more work? I didn't come here for more work. I came for therapy.
Before we ever talk about that, sort of the broader effects and actually getting more at the root cause and all of those sorts of things.
I think that was very well said, and I thank you for sharing that, because when we get into the scientific aspects of this, it's a whole nother conversation, because the benefits are so profound, and the more and more of these studies are showing the impacts of the neuroplasticity and regeneration of gray brain matter, in these subjects. That is profound, because often what I'm learning through the work that we do through the Grunsau Foundation is that PTSD is being very much misdiagnosed as TBI, right? And if we are applying these medicines to individuals with TBI, that's where the real benefits are happening, because we're healing the brain that has often succumbed to some sort of damage, scarring, lesions that are affecting cognitive behaviors or cognitive thoughts, and then destructive behaviors. Most importantly, that's where a lot of the self-deprecating behavior coming from, or the porn addictions, and just things of the soothing behaviors, right, are coming from those areas. So what I like to think about psilocybin in a lot of these classes of psychoplastogens is that these are master teachers. right?
Yes.
When you're sitting with them, like it is forcing you to sit with yourself. It is self-actualization to the ninth degree, and you cannot escape it. The only way out is through, and you have to sit with your own self. And that is wildly terrifying for most people because they have never had that experience, right? To even sit and meditate for a period of time, most people have not truly done that for themselves because you can get these same psychoactive things in therapy, that type of therapy, because we naturally store DMT in our body, in our lungs. If you can access that, you can have these same type of experiences. But, you know, one of the things I think I love the most is your analogy of the skiing, right? Because I use something very similar in the conversations that I've had, and it's beautiful that we've not talked about that, right? And it just happened, right? I relate these experiences to a house. You live on a house on the side of a mountain, and that mountain gets snowfall, right, all the time. And you've created behaviors of going to chop wood, go to their mailbox, go to sit in your tree, go play in the backyard, whatever that is. We created all these behaviors that created tracks. And then the psychedelic comes in and a gentle snowfall or a violent snowfall, depending on what it is, right, is going to cover that. And you now are given that opportunity. The hope that this provides for every individual, it may not be the first time, but you will have this opportunity, is to choose what paths you want to create in the future, right? To your point, like the paths that make me feel comfortable. I'm good with those paths. There's nothing I need to change there. But this path and relationship I might have with alcohol, I need to reevaluate that. This relationship I have with women, I might need to reevaluate that. This relationship I have with my parents, I might need to reevaluate that. And this is the beauty and the hope that this stuff is providing, that people are seeking hundreds of hours of therapy for, taking 44 pills a day just to have a sense of hope and happiness.
Yep.
Like I think that is the benefit of this stuff, and I think that is truly the awfulness that comes in. The double side of that blade is that we're just not having the access right now that could be affording the hope to millions of people within this country, and essentially, around the planet. Because this is not an American phenomenon.
No, definitely.
I think it's exacerbated in America because of the materialness of capitalism, right? And that's fine. I'm a capitalist. I believe in capitalism, but everything has it should be with discipline.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I think that we owe it to ourselves, right? This opportunity, and again, I think Texas can be leaders. The United States can be leaders in the medical sciences once again, and saying there is a new way forward. And you know what? And it doesn't have to do anything with profit.
Right.
Period.
Yeah, and I think something that I will say, going both to Texas and to things, what is out there in hope. Talked about psilocybin. I do just want to mention ibogaine as well, because it does have that similar and perhaps even more robust sort of psychoplastic properties, but also psilocybin is very unique in the way that it works on the opioid receptors specifically. So there's a lot of interest that it may be really, unlike anything else that exists, incredibly promising as a treatment for opioid use disorder, which of course is a significant problem. But I have had the opportunity to publish, several observational papers, and observational papers just meaning that we're not actually involved in the dosing. We're just treating or evaluating people before and after. All special operators who left the country to go and participate in ibogaine and 5-MeO treatment. This is actually with Dr. Polanco's clinic. And again, that these, I think veterans are generally incredibly bright, incredibly motivated problem solvers. You're going to do the things that you need to do to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Whether that is finding a way to heal, or if you identify yourself as the problem, to eliminate said problem. And these folks, many of them did go to these interventions as that Hail Mary pass. Like everything's kind of, written on the wall. It's this or I'm tapping out.
Yeah.
Many of them will tell you that straight up. 3 days, like 3.5 days, they go, come back. And again, not a one size fits all, of course, but it is working on the addiction stuff, whether that is opiates, alcohol, behavioral things, porn, gambling, whatever it may be, but also that very kind of transdiagnostic, the depression, PTSD symptoms, suicidality, TBI, all of this. And I do think one of the things that I haven't necessarily explicitly said that I think is one of the most critical pieces of this is the cognitive or psychological flexibility. And again, that's that plasticity, but that flexibility is that capacity to see alternatives, to see that it is not simply black and white,
Yes.
that alcohol is not the only answer, suicide is not the only answer. Maybe my family doesn't actually hate me completely and think they'd be better off without me. Whatever these thoughts are, there's the opportunity for nuance and alternatives, which that in and of itself is life-saving, all the rest aside.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. I think what is interesting that's happening in the state of Texas with the ibogaine efforts is, building on what started in Kentucky with the Opioid Abatement Commission there with Brian Hubbard leading that, in finding the right partners in the state of Texas that are willing to stand on the forward edge, that's willing to say we are the innovators, and we'll take all the stones, we'll take all the arrows, but we believe in this, right? And with that belief, they've got a significant amount of partners. They're driving well over $50 million in opportunity through a consortium to bring this modality to research and application. And I think, that is the way forward, right? And and I think everybody listening, get up to speed as much as you can on this subject of ibogaine, alternative modalities in psychedelic therapies that I believe, and my good friend here, Dr. Averill, believes as well, is the way forward in treating our mental health in this country in a new way, right? Because the old way is not working anymore, and we're losing too many of our loved ones, our friends, and our family to allow this to continue. And it is our responsibility, right, as members of society, to stand up and say we're having enough. We've had enough, and we can do better. Because if we don't, then the status quo continues, and then it is on. We're all to blame at that point.
Right.
And I'm tired of watching my friends die. I really am, and I know that you are as well. Being a survivor of your father, and I'm terribly sorry about that. And I'm sure this is what drives you in the things that you're doing. Because my death, the death of my friend, drives me, and I will not put down this pack until we have achieved victory. Yeah. And we're building quite the group of people to do that.
Yes, no, I completely agree. That I think that's one of the, I suppose, really beautiful things, and also incredibly unfortunate things, is to look at the community of people who advocated for 1802, who are advocating now. I believe that it is Senate Bill 3717, the ibogaine bill, that is, again, Texas being landmark, trying to push forward significant research dollars to further ibogaine in terms of the FDA pipeline. That the people out there advocating, the people out there shouting from the rooftops, begging in the streets, are you, who have lost many, many friends, are people like me who have lost patients, who lost my father, who lost a cousin. It's people who are personally affected, who have lost someone, or who almost lost themselves, that are begging for someone to help them save lives.
That's it.
And again, it's beautiful that people are coming forward and doing that work. And then there's that other piece of me that says, why do they have to? Why do any of us have to come forward and shout from the rooftops and beg, like, please, can we do this research? Please, can we consider expanded access? Please, can we do something that is different?
Yeah. I mean, I can only speak from my own personal experiences and those that I have shared with others. In that, I was a 30-year plus smoker, a alcohol abuser, damn near alcoholic. And my experiences with this plant-based medicine has cured me of all of that stuff. And I don't use the word cure very lightly, right? Yeah. I have not smoked a cigarette in nearly 4 years, and my relationship with alcohol is non-existent. Yeah. And I could never, ever have been able to be in a position to achieve that without this medicine. It has been such a part of my life for so very long that it was arresting me in so many ways. Absolutely. And, I was able to break free of that. And if that gave me that type of hope, who was an individual who was suicidal for many circumstances, to put me in a position where I am now, that's all rear view mirror for me, then I can only imagine what it's doing for other people that are in far worse states than I. And I will be that person that stands on the wall and champions those things for others, and stand next to you in doing so very proudly. And I want to say, thank you, Doctor, my friend Lynette, for everything that you do, because it is important. This work is it is the way forward. It is innovative, and I believe will be the answer to some of the challenges that this country is facing in its mental health. And you're out there on the edge, man, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, likewise, it is really an honor and a privilege to do the work. I think, that I often say there is something very, very sacred about the work. Not even sacred in the religious sense, just sacred knowing what's on the line for people. Yeah. And that certainly, yes, I too will be there, on the front lines and continue shouting from the rooftop.
That's right. We'll just get louder and more organized.
Right.
And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that are living in Texas, send a email to your representative in support of SB 3717. Right, that is the ibogaine access legislation that is being put forward by the group here in Texas. And they're doing a fantastic job. So get behind that. Send an email. They have to respond. And then if you feel so inclined to follow the good doctor here, where can they find you and how can they support?
So yes, if you are interested in the study or know someone who may be, I think we'll post that on the website. But you can certainly find us at emerging, EMERGING, at bcm.edu. That's our research program email. I am on LinkedIn, Instagram, all of those things. LinkedIn is probably the best spot, or just finding me first name last at bcm.edu. But certainly we would love to screen you for the study, or screen your friends, family, colleagues for the study. And yeah, I will make the very brief note. I know I said this at the beginning. I always like to make this note. Just if you are someone who is considering these interventions, particularly if you are someone who may not have access to a clinical trial and or who has sought out a clinical trial but told you are not eligible for any reason, I certainly understand the disappointment, the frustration, the desperation there, and understand that many people may seek these out on their own, and just would urge you to please do your due diligence and understand that, I suppose, both the risks and benefits of these interventions, that they are intensive, they are not safe or appropriate for everyone, that they are different, so one may be more safe and appropriate than others. And just making sure that you are aware of those, that you know your own potential risks, certainly cardiovascularly, for example. And that if you do seek these out on your own, making sure that you really have done the work in terms of thinking about your own intentions, your own safety. Where are you going to do this? What are you going to do? How can you make sure that you kind of engage in as much harm reduction as possible? Because certainly having someone engage in these interventions and not have some of those things in place does have the potential of going sideways in really bad ways. So just doing all we can, I suppose, to take care of ourselves and one another. And yeah, certainly, again, if you know folks interested, please reach out. And hopefully within the next 6 months or so, we'll have a similar sort of announcement about ibogaine, that we'll be able to do some of that research as well. Should be great.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Very excited. Well, you're doing incredible work, both in the state of Texas and nationally on all the efforts of the Veterans Mental Health and Leadership Coalition and our dear friend Adam Marr and the general over there, and many others that are contributing to that coalition. I'm proud to be a part of it myself, and we'll continue to move the ball down the field, move the change, as they say, and hopefully with all of your help at home, we can get this across the finish line and be celebrating here in the near future on the advancements of new innovative therapies addressing mental health in the country of the United States of America. So with that being said, my friends, you know the drill. Be kind to one another and wash those stinking hands. And until next time, we'll see you again soon on American Grit. Take care.